Okay, I have chapter 11 coming right up. In late November, Abel was on his way home from the book, mulling over a chapter that he had just read. The bears were going to war against bears from another country. They were going even though on both sides everyone wanted peace. This was something to think about with so much time to think. The sky was gray. Nature looked its drabbest. Abel thought he saw snowflakes, not falling, but just wandering about in the air. Then there was more, and he felt a few melt on his head. That winter was coming, he had known all along, but here was more evidence, and it made him uneasy. Was he as prepared as he ought to be? There was an owl around, too, with nasty intentions, and that added to his uneasiness. The environment didn't seem altogether friendly. In the dead grass, he saw a gray-brown feather. Ooh, a feather. Certain that it could only be the owl's, he took it home. There he poked the quill into the soft, rotting wood of his floor, where it stood erect, like a sort of talisman. He owned something of the owl's from his own body, but the owl had nothing of Abel's. This gave Abel a sense of advantage, well, at least for the moment. Here is a picture of Abel, and you can see that he's carrying around this long pole with his knife attached to the end, and he's finding the feather. I believe that might be it. So he's taken that, what he thinks is the owl feather, taken it home, and he's put it inside of his log. I like Abel even more because he collects feathers, and so do I. Abel found himself uttering an incantation at the feather, not knowing where the words came from. So this is Abel, he's so angry at the owl, he's decided to yell weird stuff at the feather as if it's at the owl. Remember, Abel's been by himself for quite a long time, so he's kind of losing it sometimes. Foul owl, ugly you! You'll never get me, whatever you do. You cannot hurt me, you cannot kill. You're in my power, I have your quill. He felt he was casting a spell on the detested bird of prey that would paralyze its evil force. After this, out in his yard in the light descending snow, Abel addressed Amanda's statue as if it were herself. "Amanda," he said, "I am safe." Then he went indoors and worked at making himself a winter cape with a hood. He wove 2 layers of cloth from the fine filaments of grass and sandwiched in between the 2 layers some of the milkweed fluff he'd stored in his log. Still full of forebodings of a hard winter, he foraged about for what he was sure was the last edible stuff on the island. Various seeds, dry berries, mushrooms. He crammed his rooms full of these viands. Perhaps it was more than he would need to see the winter through, but he had no way of knowing. Anyway, his abundant store eased his misgivings. Engrossed one day in these practical chores, he was shocked to see the owl again, up on a branch in a tree near his house. It was asleep, but it sat erect, like that of a sentinel, its eyes, which even shut, seemed to stare. The tight grasp of its talons on the bough and the bloody sunset in the sky behind it filled poor Abel with wintry dread. He hurried home, his heart tripping. What should he do? Could he possibly kill the obnoxious creature while it slept, so that it would die as if in a dream? How? With a rock on the end of a rope? With fire? With a burning javelin of wood? So many birds had gone south. Why not this owl? Was an owl really a bird? What an odd, unheavenly bird. Abel, back in his log, knelt down in prayer and asked a question he had asked before, though never so urgently. Why did God make owls, snakes, cats, foxes, fleas, and other such loathsome, abominable creatures. He felt there had to be a reason. Here's a picture of Abel making his cloak, his winter cloak, making it himself. And then this is him wearing it and being outside gathering up the last of winter food. Chapter 12. Let me see. Okay. I will read chapter 12. In December, Abel began talking to himself. He had done it before, but only internally. But now he spoke out loud, and the sound of his own voice vibrating in his body felt vital. Addressing himself by name, he would give himself advice or ask questions and then answer them. Sometimes he argued back and forth with himself. Abel with Abel. And he even got quite angry when he disagreed with his own opinions. He often found himself hard to convince. He talked out loud to Amanda, too, addressing her statue. He assured her that he would see her again, and the others he loved. There was no question he'd be getting off of the island, though as yet he had no idea how. He was patient. That is, he considered himself patient. Because what other love-longing, wife-craving, homesick creature would remain so pacingly calm, so nervously resolute, so crazily sane, as long as Abel had? The first real snowfall was a tail deep. Abel made himself snowshoes and went to his book with a homemade shovel in one arm, his spear in the other. He dug the book out of the snow and read chapter 19. By chapter 19, the Bear War was at its worst. Many had been killed or wounded. It made Abel wonder about civilization. But, come to think of it, the owl, who was not civilized, was pretty warlike too. The hero, Captain Burren, was riding home from the battlefield to the one that he had waltzed with in the first chapter, the one that he loved. It was also winter in the story, and a sergeant was saying things that were foolish and wise and funny. He wished he were hibernating instead of warring. Some of his statements made Abel roll around on the page, his cloudy breath exploding in spasms of laughter. Here's a picture of Abel reading during the wintertime on the book. It was hard to cover the book when he finished his reading for the day because the leaves stuck together in frozen sheets. His paws got icy cold. At home, he had to drink some of his wine to dispel the chill in his bones. On his way home from reading chapter 21, he had a perilous encounter with the owl again. But he wasn't caught off guard. Whenever the spear was in his paw, the owl was on his mind, and he apparently was always on the mind of the owl, too. Each one kept a sharp eye out, the would-be killer and the intended victim. Hoping to catch Abel napping, the owl swept down from an old decayed tree. It seemed to be at home in rotten trees. But Abel had his spear at the ready the moment the owl reached him. The owl swerved off as Abel thrust at it and pretended to fly away defeated, but immediately it swooped down again. This time, Abel slashed sideways and thrust viciously upward, and he could feel the point of his knife penetrate the owl's flesh, though the owl made no sound. It only winced and fended off the spear with one claw. It ripped off Abel's cape with the other. In a fit of fear and rage, Abel thrust again and again, desperately without plan. His fury so upset and bewildered the owl that it flew upward and roosted on a dead limb of the tree, staring down at him in disbelief. Instead of making off while he had the advantage, Abel pointed his spear and challenged the owl to descend and fight. The owl continued to stare at him. There's a picture of that. So Abel should be running right now, But yet he's so mad, he's yelling at it and challenging it to come down and fight. "Coward!" Abel screamed, the veins swelling in his neck. "Come down and do battle, bird, reptile, fiend, or whatever kind of villain you are." If the owl was offended at Abel's insults, it didn't show that it was. Solemnly, it only blinked and stared. "Down with unsightly devils! Down with evil of any sort!" Abel yelled, and with all of his might he foolishly flung his spear at the bird of prey. That was dumb. It struck the branch where the owl stood, and then it fell to the ground. As Abel ran to retrieve his weapon, the owl dove. Abel dodged and raced around the trunk of the tree. The owl couldn't fly in circles any faster than Abel could run, so there was always the tree between them. The chase went on, sometimes reversing direction. This mad carousel so offended the owl's ancient sense of decorum that it grew confused and crashed into the tree eventually. And then it had to go off somewhere to sit in a huff, unruffle its feathers, and regain its ruthless composure. Abel finally grabbed his spear and his cape, and he scampered home. By now, Abel owned 3 of the owl's feathers. He was quite sure that they were the owl's. Without waiting to catch breath after his heroic skirmish, he began uttering over these detested feathers the most horrible imprecations imaginable. Heaven forfend that the owl should have suffered a fraction of what Abel wished upon it. Abel wished that its feathers would turn to lead so that it would fall on its head from the world's tallest tree. That its beak would rot and become useless even for eating mush. And that it should be blind as a bat and fly into a dragon's flaming mouth. And that it should sink in quicksand mixed with broken bottles very slowly to prolong its suffering, and much more of the same sort. December grew steadily colder. Abel began tearing margins from the pages of his book and using the paper to fill the chinks in his doorway whenever the stones were set in place. Even so, the cold lanced through, especially when it was windy. So you can see that more winter is coming. It's getting colder. All right, so that is the end of chapter 12, and I'm going to stop there for the day. I think my voice and my throat have had it. But I am doing well, guys. I am doing all right. I'm getting a lot of rest. So hope you're enjoying the book. I'm loving reading it again. Have a good night.